Hello and welcome back to Too Many Books. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk to you about Flashback, a novel by Dan Simmons, perhaps his most controversial novel. This was the first time I've read it, and I'll share my thoughts on the novel in a second. But first, let me preface it by talking about Simmons himself. Now, Dan Simmons entered the scene back in the 80s with Song of Kali, which is a superb horror novel. A-plus horror. And then he soon moved on to one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time with Hyperion Cantos. There's 4 novels in it. The first one in particular is most praised. I love all 4. He's also done various crime novels over the years. And then he dove back into science fiction in the 2000s with Ilium and Olympus. And, then 2011 came around. I think this was 2011 came around. And he did Flashback, which is his most controversial one yet. Flashback was originally a novella, a short novella published in Love Death collection that he published back in the 90s. I haven't read that novella, but I know the basic premise, the basic idea of Flashback as a whole is the same, even though the plot might be different with the full novel. This is, for lack of a better word, this can easily be referred to as Dan Simmons' political novel, or Dan Simmons' more unhinged novel, or Dan Simmons' extremist right-wing novel, or maybe his angry, grumpy old man novel. All those are very accurate descriptions of what Flashback is. It does shine through within the narrative itself, within the world building itself. The story of Flashback deals with a former Denver detective by the name of Nick Bottom, because, if it's a Dan Simmons novel, you have to have references to old literature, which is something I absolutely love with it. It's almost kind of like a secret history, but it's not actually secret history. It's just a lot of classic references. I mean, Hyperion itself, the very first novel, is based on the Canterbury Tales. So, of course, the protagonist here is named Nick Bottom, very similar to the Shakespeare character of the same name. Well, in name only, I should say. He is a detective who former detective who's fallen on hard times. He lives in a world in which a vast majority of the population is addicted, the world's population, not even just the United States, but the world's population is addicted to a drug called Flashback. Flashback allows you to relive the past, relive better times. And boy, do you need to relive those better times, because the world they're living in is absolute misery and chaos. The United States is fractured. It's completely split. The world is pretty much run by the Islamic Caliphate. The Arab nations, the Middle East, have all banded together and essentially taken over the world. Japan is one of the few remaining superpowers. The United States is a hollow shell of what it once was, where most of the people are too busy getting high on Flashback to not actually go to work, to not actually, contribute to society. And it's all thanks to Obama. Oh my God. Yeah. So I guess the original Flashback, which I said I haven't read, is actually more of like anti-Reagan. That was published in the 90s. But this published in 2011, like I said, I think it was 2011, is very much, 2011. This one in particular really shows that Simmons has a chip on his shoulder for the Obama administration. In short, in this world, this near-distant future, the 2030s, so you're thinking like 20-something years ahead, Obama has pretty much caused the downfall of the United States. He has gotten everyone forced entitlements where, everyone is now retiring at an earlier age, getting full benefits without actually contributing back to society. Nobody's paying any of their taxes because they're all avoiding responsibility. And it's just, yeah. Like, if you were like, man, I really wish there was a science fiction novel that Glenn Beck wrote, then Flashback is probably for you. Or, Ben Shapiro, perhaps, might be one to have written this kind of futuristic hellscape where, it's like all the fear mongering, and I'm not trying to get political myself, but both sides of the aisle deal with fear mongering. This is very much a novel of like what would happen if those worst fears from one of the sides, in this case the right side, came true. Every last aspect of it, which I mean, obviously that didn't happen, but this is science fiction, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. The story itself, I'm 5 minutes in, I haven't even talked about the story itself. The story itself deals with Nick Bottom, who is, as I mentioned, now Flashback addicted to Flashback himself. He is hired to investigate the murder that occurred a decade prior of a son of a wealthy head of a Japanese family. Japan is run by essentially different families, all vying for power. The son of one family was brutally murdered a decade prior. It was one of Nick Bottom's last cases, and he's being brought back into the fray, brought back out of retirement, if you will, to investigate this murder. And I will say, taking the politics aside, I actually enjoyed Nick Bottom's chapters for the murder mystery aspect. I haven't read any of Simmons' murder mystery noir ones before. He had a couple of them, like Joe Kurtz, I think was the detective's name, and I almost want to read those next just to kind of see, because I enjoyed the aspects of the kind of detective trying to figure out what's going on. What I didn't enjoy were the just absolutely in-your-face world building. Like, anytime the world building was to occur within the novel, he is very much just shoving his political views in your face. Which, I mean, it's like world building in and of itself is going to be influenced by one's politics. That's bound to happen. But you can build the world without having the politics be the core of that world, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying it's because I disagree with Simmons on his politics or anything like that. I mean, it's either end of the spectrum. Like, Simmons is firmly planted in, the far right with this novel. On the far left, you might have Stephen King. And Stephen King can still base novels around his politics. I've heard Holly is one such instance that does that. I have not read Holly. But I know if that novel is based around politics, it'd probably annoy me as well. So it doesn't really matter which side of the political spectrum you fall on. I just, if it's a fiction novel, if it's a nonfiction novel, a political science novel, all for it. That makes sense. But it's a fiction novel. It kind of takes away from the experience when you have the author's politics just kind of slammed in your face over and over again. I mean, if it's like an over and done with thing, then fine, that's okay. I mean, I just finished reading Wendy's Magic Feather by Rich Chismar, and there's a president there who, this takes place in the 90s, the president in that novel is very much based on Trump. And, it's like, it was kind of over and done with. It didn't focus too much on the president. Yes, it was kind of annoying and jarring when he's taking his pot shots at the character. But you didn't base the entire world around that. Whereas in Flashback, Dan Simmons did exactly that. And I didn't even mention the other two characters. There's actually three narrators, three protagonists within Flashback. Nick Bottom is only just the central one, but the other two are still very much important. You do alternate between them with the chapters. You also have Nick Bottom's son, who a decade prior went to live out with his grandfather, and then you also have the grandfather, Nick Bottom's father-in-law, and I'm not gonna lie, the son's chapters were all right. It's kind of dealing with like a youth in revolt. He's kind of a punk kid, trying to make a name for himself, sticking it up against the man. The man in this case being his grandfather or his own father and everything beyond that. I mean, those chapters are all right. The only thing is it doesn't really add to the narrative, in my opinion. And then there's the father-in-law or the grandfather, depending on, if you're referring to the son or Nick himself. His chapters are just, oh God, his chapters are bad. The father-in-law / grandfather is this old-timey, I don't want to say hippie. Hippie's not the right word. But he's he's from the prior generation. He was the generation that was in charge when the world went to shit. He wanted Medicare for all, or he wanted healthcare for all, and free healthcare. He wants to help the people. He's very much a socialist in regards, but his are the most disgusting world-building chapters in the novels. Like, it's just like every one of his chapters is like him coming to see the error of his ways, and how much his generation and his liberal thinking ruined the world. And man, how he should have, he should have been a little bit harsher. And it's just like, dude, Jesus. It's just like, it doesn't add anything to the world. He's just a vehicle for Dan Simmons to get preachy on his politics. Which, like I said, even if I was had the exact same political views as Dan Simmons, which I don't, but I mean that's not neither here nor there. Even if I did have the exact same views as Dan Simmons, that would still be nauseatingly in your face. Like I expect more from Dan Simmons as an author. I guess reading this in hindsight, after he, kind of fell off the face of the earth and got into online feuds with Greta Thunberg over the status of, over the idea of climate change, I guess I shouldn't have expected more. But if I had gone in blind at the time, I would have expected more from Dan Simmons. It's a little too preachy for its own good. Yes, Nick Bottom's chapters, which are a majority of the chapters, have a pretty decent noir, especially almost a futuristic noir feel to them, and those are all right. But the entire narrative is bogged down by the political undertones and preachiness and just absolutely political world building that is centered solely upon Simmons' policies. And yeah, it's a rough read because of that. It's like I said, it would have been better being a satirical. It almost feels like it could be a satire at times because of how ridiculous some of the aspects of the world building are. And if the whole thing felt like that, then I could, say, oh, maybe it's a satire, and in that instance, maybe if it's supposed to be a tongue in cheek, it could be more stomach, you'd be able to stomach it better. But the tone used by Dan Simmons constantly throughout really hammers home that it's not satire. So it's take it with a grain of salt. I do have one major complaint, at least to me, but it's hard to talk about it without spoiling it, so I'm not going to say that. I will get into that in a minute once I'm done talking about these editions. In case you have read it or you don't mind spoilers, and maybe if you have read it and I missed something, you can explain to me what I missed, because I would greatly appreciate it. I will say, the ending I liked the ending. But anyways, Dan Simmons' Flashback, I can't say that I necessarily recommend it, unless you're thinking, man, what if Ben Shapiro wrote a sci-fi noir novel? Then maybe you'll like Flashback. But anyways, it is available wherever books are sold. I do have the signed trade edition. This is actually, the trade edition from Little Brown, which has been signed, flat signed by Dan Simmons on the title page. It was also published, back in 2011, by Subterranean Press in a nice cloth-bound signed edition. Nicer quality, nicer end papers, is signed by him as well. This is a PC copy, but this is long sold out as well. I say as well, but this one is not sold out. you could probably still pick up copies, whoever they are. I will say I do like the numbering of the chapters. The 1-point chapters are the ones that follow Nick, and then you got the 2-point chapters following you got the 2-point chapters, and then the 3-point chapters following the son and following Professor Emeritus George Leonard Fox, who is the father-in-law. But But anyways, thank you guys very much for watching. I will talk about the ending in just a second and my biggest gripe if you want to hang on for a moment. But if you aren't hanging on and you want to do sign off because you want to avoid the spoilers, thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing because I do at least one book review a week with plenty of unboxing videos in between here and there for you to check out. So anyways, thank you guys. But I will do spoilers in 5 seconds. So, 15 minutes, 15 seconds. We're going to get into spoilers. Here we go. So, full disclosure, the Nick Bottom is hired by Japanese millionaire in order to investigate the murder of his son that happened a decade prior. I have no restraint on spoilers right now. It's revealed that the father had the son killed. Like Sato, who's been, working with Nick this entire time, following him around like a shadow. Sato is the one that had killed the son on the father's orders. He also had to kill his own daughter, but enough of that. It was basically to prove a point to the other families. My biggest gripe, and perhaps if you've read this, you can explain this to me because maybe it was something I missed. I don't want to go back and reread the chapters in case it was something I missed. But why? Now, why did he kill the son? I can understand that, like in terms of, not that I understand somebody killing their son, but I can understand, they give you the reasons of him trying to express his power, express that he can't be held, at the mercy of his child's decisions. My question is, why bother hiring Nick at that point? Like, they've done investigations. The police did their investigations, couldn't find anything. The Japanese government did their investigations, couldn't find anything. So why go back and hire Nick to go through, why? You already know what happened because you are the one that orchestrated it. You're not under any pressure by the other families. You've proved your point to the other families. Like, why bother hiring Nick in the first place? It just seems like, you're forcing the narrative in that regard. Like, yeah, the narrative wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have the novel Flashback if you didn't hire Nick. But I can't help but feel like there was no motivation for him to have hired Nick in the first place. So, yeah, sure, the action at the end and the is he in F2, is he not in F2? I liked all that, but I can't help but scratching my head thinking there was no reason for him to have hired Nick in the first place, right? Am I overthinking it? It seems pretty obvious to me. Am I missing something? Let me know in the comments below if I am. That's Flashback by Dan Simmons. I got to read the novella, see if it's, any different. But this novel, it did not do it for me. Anyways, thank you guys very much for watching, bearing with me through this spoiler territory if you've stuck around. We'll see you around next time.